Without any further ado, welcome everybody to the very first ever Imaginary Game Club. It's a monthly game club, like a book club, but for video games. In other words, infinitely better in every possible way, because you don't have to read any books. You just might have to read a few little dialogue lines in a video game, but we all skip those anyways. I am joined today, I'm skipping ahead. Am I going to edit all this out? I don't know. I'm Caxed, your host, the developer of Meticulous. You can see here on my shirt if you're watching the video version, and lead developer man of Imaginary Game Studios. And I am joined today by... Go ahead and introduce yourself, friend.
I am Eric, and I help Christian out on a lot of the Imaginary Game stuff. And I don't think I have an official role with you, sir. I'm
pretty sure we gave you one, some kind of narrative designer, something such.
There's not a lot of narrative in Meticulous.
There is over a 10,000 word fully voiced script in that game. Thank you very much. Which is way more than anybody would ever think when you sit down and play Meticulous and you get a few lines of dialogue. But what can I say? When you're bringing a character to life like the wonderful host that is Medic, it takes a lot of work in the back end. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you're just not aware of.
This is a topic for another podcast, the difference between writing and narrative design.
Well, maybe we'll get into a little bit of that here with our game for this month, where we're talking about Off, which, according to the Off wiki, it is the critically acclaimed Belgian French language surreal adventure RPG made by Mortis Ghost in 2008 with RPG Maker 2003. It was originally translated into English in 2011. But I don't know about you, I played version 3, which was translated in 2016. But it's considered a gem among indie adventure RPGs, and it's widely praised for its in-depth and complex story, its rich and immersing environment, and its memorable characters. All right, the wiki's getting a little bit self-indulgent over here, but, for the most part, I think I agree with all of that. So why don't we go ahead and start with just giving some of our initial impressions here. What did you think of this game? No spoilers just yet. Did you like it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's kind of like a really dense chocolate chip pancake, where if it was any bigger than it was, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much. I think it's so rich that it's a lot. It's a lot, and I spent a lot of the gameplay just going like, "What is happening here?" But that's kind of the charm of it in a way, and we'll get into more of the details later. But I would definitely recommend it to someone, specifically because you can complete it in like an afternoon or two. It's not a huge commitment, so if you hate it. It's not like you've wasted 70 hours.
I think I spent about 8 hours in the game in total, but that's also with a minor amount of grinding, just to make sure that I had enough money to buy the right upgrades for my characters and stuff like that. But that's completely optional. The game is balanced, I think, really well, that you can just play it from start to finish without ever having to grind like most people might be afraid of in these RPG Maker games. I will say, in general, for the Imaginary Game Club, this is, I think, perfect example of the right kind of game that I hope we can continue to do for this program. Just short, little, under 10-hour experiences, clearly made by somebody with an idea. Maybe a little bit older, easy to get. This game is completely free. You can download it from the Off Wiki, or if you're in the Imaginary Game Studios Discord server, there is a link in the announcements channel there. But I'd have to agree with you. I think I really enjoyed the the pacing of it. Not necessarily that I enjoyed every section of the game equally, but it does keep things moving. It's light on its toes, and as you go through each of the different areas in the game, it kind of has a different feeling and touches on different narrative ideas in a way that keeps your interest throughout the entire short experience. I don't think it ever really overstayed its welcome with me.
No, I hadn't really considered the pacing that much, but if there was a point that I felt was tedious or that was just generally unpleasant, and there were a few of them, you're only in them for like 10 minutes. I mean, the game moves along at a pretty substantial rate. So, yeah, it's one of those things. If you're not having a good time, just give it a few minutes and see where it takes you, because it doesn't stay in one place for very long.
Gameplay-wise, I'd say it has a pretty good variety. I mean, between that old-school JRPG combat versus solving puzzles versus the occasional little mini-game it threw in there that caught me by surprise.
Yeah, you talking about the smokestack?
Like the smokestack, or occasionally they'd put on little time limits so that you have to go through a certain section before you run out of time, and so there's limited amounts of loot that you'll have time to go pick up, so you kind of have to make choices about where you're going to go and how you're going to try and progress through an area. A little bit of that economy of movement design stuff that we'd talked about otherwise. I feel like there were...
Yes, Mortis Ghost did a tremendous amount with a series of very simple mechanics. I'll definitely concede that point.
Here's a question. Did you use the auto combat? Because one of the most unique features of this is that the game can play itself, which I'll go ahead and say was way ahead of its time, because now we have the whole idle genre of games that play themselves. But off features an auto button in the combat menu where the AI does a mostly pretty good job of choosing the right attacks and abilities to beat combat for you, with the exception of cleansing negative stat effects. So even if you're playing the auto mode, I think you do still have to occasionally step in and be like, all right, please wake my entire party up so that we don't just sit here and get our faces chewed off.
Interesting that you asked that question, because I did use the auto mode, and I was curious. I think it was let's say it was 2 hours into the game. I was just curious about how effective the AI would handle battles. And I ended up using auto for every fight for the rest of the game, including
even the
boss
bosses?
fights. Yep. And I will say I didn't game over a single time using auto, but I kept my party pretty well geared. And there was one encounter. It wasn't even a boss fight. It was just a kind of an unfortunate blend of enemies. They did KO one of my party members, which was the only time it happened in the game. And they brought the other three very close to death. And I was shocked watching it. It's the only time anything like that came close to happening. And
I'm surprised. I'm really excited to figure out exactly how you progress through the game, because I definitely struggled. Well, I don't want to say struggled as much as I definitely found some difficulty spikes that caught me off guard.
I don't know that I would say the same. There's one instance that I can think of where the difficulty made me go, oh, wow. And I still used auto and it was fine. But I don't know. When do we get into spoiler territory on these?
Well, first, I guess let's go ahead and if you have anything else spoiler free you want to add, go ahead. But otherwise, then we can go ahead and give our initial ratings for anybody to decide how they want to play the game themselves if they have not yet taken the time to play off.
There are a handful of spoiler-free things that I think are worth talking about.
All right, then let's dig into it.
So two areas: the visual language and the music.
Sure.
The music. Let's start with. I'm not a huge music guy in video games. I have very shallow tastes when it comes to that. But the music in this game was disgusting. In the best way. It was so gross and industrial. And for those of you that haven't played the game, it has some environmental undertones about things not being great, and with the world around us. And the soundtrack was such a good reflection of that. I swear that there was one song where it sounded just like squelching meat. It was so nasty, and I thought it was very appropriate. And what are your thoughts on them? You're the music guy between the two of us.
Yeah.
What did you think?
I think it did a really incredible job of giving the game its own unique personality, especially in these old school RPG style games. The soundtrack is such an important part of building an atmosphere, and I have to agree 100% on that front that the music is not necessarily pretty. There are definitely some jams in there, like that first combat music you get. It's almost like an early iteration of electro swing, if you're familiar with that genre of taking like old school, I don't know, black and white dance numbers with lots of like clarinet and sax and crooner style singing, and then layering that on top of modern dance electronic music. It kind of feels like early versions of that genre before that genre existed, or at least before I was aware of it in some places. And then in other places, it almost stops feeling like music entirely. It is just noise, but in a way that is intelligently selected for the material. I do wish it was just a little bit, I don't know. I would love to hear the high quality version of the soundtrack, because obviously this is an older game, smaller file sizes. I don't actually know what the file type of the music is in this game, but it kind of helps build the atmosphere of sounding like an older game with some of the lower quality audio. But like one thing I noticed in the README file is they talk about how people were complaining about the music not looping perfectly, and the response in the README was, "Shut up! It's RPG Maker's fault. We did the best we could."
Why were you reading the README?
It said README, so you're gonna ignore it like that? You're gonna disrespect the game's creator in that way? How could you?
I would never do that. I also read the README. For various reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your point about the old-timey sound to it. So the main character of this game is named the Batter, Batter, and that's not like an implication or a description that is a euphemism for anything. He is literally a baseball player. And I guess there's no era specific to batters in the sport of baseball. He could have been a baseball player from 2007 when this game came out. But for some reason in my head, he was absolutely like out of like the 1890s. He didn't speak that way or anything, but just his character, and all the characters actually, are rendered in black and white. And I don't know, just the whole feng shui about him made me think he was from a different era. And I agree with you, when the soundtrack, certain parts of the soundtrack come in and sound very antique.
That's a good word for it.
Thank you. It complemented the Batter's whole vibe, I think.
I'm going to go ahead and blame the Avengers on that one, because when Captain America wakes up in the modern era, the way they try and make him feel like he's still in the 1940s is by playing a radio broadcast of a baseball game. I'm gonna guess that radio broadcasts of baseball games were around a lot longer than NFL broadcasts.
You know that there are still radio broadcasts of baseball games.
There's still radios? What are you talking about?
I can't confirm that. I'm just making an assumption.
When's the last time you've even seen a radio?
Well, there's one in my
Radios
car.
aren't real, just like birds.
The visual language. Let's move on from the birds thing.
Yeah, the art style is wonderfully underdone, is maybe the right word for that. I don't know. It's very sketch-like. There's a lot on the wiki about some of the early sketches that Mortis Ghost used as inspiration for the different characters, and there's really not a whole lot different from those sketches to what you see in the final game.
I do kind of wish all the art had such a distinct style, except for the art that's on screen when you're playing the majority of the game. And let me clarify, it's not the overworld, but when you're navigating
the overhead
world
view.
Yeah, it's very like Pokemon or old school Game Boy. Not uncommon for RPG Maker. But when you're in battle, it's like these sketches come to life with this kind of like abstract background. There's a term for it, like I can't think of what it is, like polka jazz or something like that, the art style.
Sure.
It's like splotchy and it looks awesome. And then when exposition is being delivered, they're like these news clippings and
I love those.
Yeah. It looks like something out of like an alchemist's diary or something like that.
What it looks like to me is it looks like diagrams from like an old late 1800s Sears catalog.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Back to the old-timey thing, right?
Yeah.
And I found myself very bored with the overhead traditional Pokemon style navigational visual system. And I don't think I would have felt that way if it wasn't juxtaposed with such interesting art. I wish that Mortis Ghost had found a way to get that sketch old school style into the overworld navigation. I don't know how, and I can't even really picture it in my head, but I just knowing what that artist is capable of, I really crave something more than the traditional little sprites walking around a blocky overworld.
Yeah, and you do get bits and pieces of other art styles throughout, but it is very limited. I will, to the game's defense, I will say that, I mean, clearly, again, the developer is getting a lot out of a little. But also, in the context of it being a more surreal kind of experience, that limited art style does give you more room to put your own impression back into the world in a way that if the art style was more detailed, it would be less open to interpretation physically in terms of the world around you, because you learn all about the materials in which this world is built out of. And part of the fun for me is imagining what a world would look like in detail, made out of the stuff that they say this world is made out of.
But I don't want to imagine
it. I will say, as I was playing it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I would love to see like the high-res 3D first-person perspective version of this game to be able to see my imagination playing out in front of me.
Maybe that's Imaginary's next project. We call up Mortis Ghost and be like, hey, we want to make the first person off.
So I guess I can talk a little bit about Mortis Ghost here. Have you ever heard of him before?
Not prior to this game, no.
I had not either. And he honestly hasn't done a ton outside of this game. Interesting, because like in the README, it talks about how they have all these crazy ideas for the world of Off and how they're considering doing a sequel. And like, please don't make fan games set in the world of Off, which is funny because then there's a whole nother wiki for fan games set in the world of Off. But after this game, I think in like 2015, he did a web comic called Dr. Cataclysm. Kind of a similar art style, but completely different story, completely different world, more sci-fi. And now, I mean, he's still active on social media. He's got Twitter page. He has a Patreon, and his Patreon claims that he is working on a new video game. So keep an eye out for potential Off sequel, maybe, or just, I mean, anything that this guy makes is something that I'm now interested in based on my experience with Off.
Just the nature of the novelty of it.
Yeah.
I may not like what he comes out with next, but I am definitely going to take a look at it. Yeah.
And for me, I mean, like, these JRPGs are kind of the I don't know, the middle ground between book and video game. So I guess just to round out our discussion about the art style, it works better for me in this type of top-down RPG to have a simple art style, because I already go into the experience with the expectation that I'm going to be imparting more of myself onto the experience than I am in like the latest Call of Duty.
Yes, I do agree with that. And I think in terms of putting yourself into the experience, maybe my favorite thing about the handful of hours I spent with Off was I had to take physical notes. I haven't done that in a game in a very long time. I grew up with like playing games like Myst and Rhythm back in the day, and just filling up notebooks when I'm like, 11 years old, just writing down random information and all that. It's been a long time since I've had to do that. And it was, I do wish some of the puzzles were a little bit more complex and Off. A lot of times the puzzle is just, it's only engaging you on the level of memory. Can you remember the numbers that you saw, 20 minutes ago? Which is fine, because it still was exciting to find numbers and write them down and wonder where they were going to come up again. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do wish it was a little bit more diverse in the puzzle solving, but that was really refreshing, like actually having a notebook next to me and feeling like a participant in the actual experience, which we'll get into this when we talk about the plot. You kind of are a character in the game in a weird way. So the note-taking aspect, I really felt like drove that point home really nicely.
Yeah, I've got my sheet of notes right here next to me. It's definitely very refreshing. I suppose that there's a subgenre of games where note-taking is still king out there somewhere on the internet. I have not played a game like this in a very long time, and it's cool. I don't know. I can't tell you any mainstream game that I have ever played, unless if I'm going all the way back to the days of Myst, where note-taking has been a part of the game experience. But it is cool. It definitely gets you more involved with the plot, in addition to the things that you're hinting at that we'll get to when we start to talk more about the narrative. I like it. I like my notes.
Let's see other non-spoily stuff. Progression in the game. I felt like every time the batter levels up, and for those that haven't played it, it's the same as any JRPG that you've ever played. You kill things, you get experience points, and you gain levels. In the batter, I felt like appropriately rewarded whenever I gained a level. It seemed like he was always getting a new move, and that move was always useful. And same with his party, even though I eventually went to just autoing every battle. The diversity of skills was really, really intriguing. Your party members, they can poison enemies. There's one party member that can hit every enemy on the screen. The batter can deal damage but also heal allies. And I wish the combat was a little bit more complex to make better use of the thought that went into this. But I was really impressed with it. Every time I leveled up, it constantly felt like something meaningful had just happened. I now had a new tool for whatever was directly ahead of me. And I would say that's even like a rarity nowadays in games. A level just is an arbitrary like attribute increase, it seems like, most of the time.
I mean, I think a big part of that is the freedom that off has to be a shorter experience. Where when we live in the world of games as a service, where every game wants to be the only game that you ever play for the rest of your life, you can't level up and learn the meteor skill because they can't keep giving you new meteor skills. Now you level up and you gain 0.2% chance to dodge fire attacks. Whoop-de-doo. Off is not that game. It does give, given the context of who your party members are, it does give tons of personality to each of the characters, and I think there is a good dynamic built into the abilities of each one where you have to make a choice of, like, the batter has really good healing abilities or he has really good offensive abilities. And the way the combat works is there's probably a better example of this mechanic, but in my brain, the game that I originally experienced this in with the most hours was Final Fantasy X-2, where it's not purely turn-based. Each character has a little attack timer meter that fills up, and when the meter is full, then they have a turn to attack. So it's a more action-packed way to play a turn-based mechanic, because if you wait too long on a character, then your opponents will get multiple turns before you get to make a choice. So you kind of have to act a little bit quickly, and you have a little bit more complexity in terms of thinking about the turn order of who's going to get to attack in what order. So based on if the batter's going to go first, maybe I need to heal, or maybe I have an opportunity to attack. Or then other characters, like you said, one has AoE moves versus buffs. Another one has the ability to cleanse different debuffs. So despite the fact that it's not the most revolutionary part of the game by any stretch of the imagination, it certainly is very serviceable and engaging for the length of the game.
I feel like the system you're describing is called ATB, which is active timed battles or something. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I feel like that debuted in like Final Fantasy 4 or Final Fantasy 6 or something like that. And I had it was a while ago, yeah. Wow. And I had the same experience that you were describing back then, where it's like the most frantic way you can have someone navigate combat menus. And
yeah,
I don't see it in its pure form that much anymore.
I think it is kind of out of date. I mean, clearly Final Fantasy isn't doing it anymore.
Well, kind of. The Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think when games went into the third dimension, it made that really complicated, because the batter attacks with a baseball bat. You don't have to actually aim the bat. You can just tell the batter who to hit, and he takes care of the rest. But as soon as we moved into the different dimension of combat, where you actually have to physically navigate the batter toward, hypothetically this doesn't happen, but you have to navigate your character toward the enemy. I think ATB kind of didn't make that much sense anymore.
Kind of acts as your cooldown in and of itself.
Yeah. So it was really nice. I keep using the word refreshing for different things, but it was really nice to play like the old school ATB again, until I started using the auto function.
Yeah, I don't think I really didn't play much of Final Fantasy uh, when it was coming out new. I went back and played some of those old school ones in the Game Boy Advance version of them, but I don't remember them nearly
Which
as well.
which number Final Fantasy was X2 for you?
In terms of the order in which I played them,
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the first Final Fantasy game that I played, and if not, it was the first one that I played the most of. I got
Surprised
all the
you.
way to the point where you have to like get different costumes for your characters to then be able to sneak into the bad guy's base. But at that point, the whole world has opened up, and it's like, go find 3 costumes in the entire world. And this is in a universe where the internet was still in its fledgling state, and I didn't have the Prima strategy guide. So that was the end of the game for me.
Can't believe you played the others after playing Final Fantasy X2.
Didn't like it? Not a fan?
No, not really. That's another podcast though.
Fair enough. So, all right. What do you think? What's your rating for Off? What do you give it?
I would say it's definitely, I think, a niche style game. If I recommended Off to my colleagues now that are busying themselves with Lies of P and Armored Core and all that, I think they would slap me. Um, but I do think that there is a really passionate group out there that responds to stuff that is just off kilter and weird and confusing. And I'm sure we'll get to talk about this a little bit shortly, but you can
So
see
the quotes that go in the trailer shot. Off kilter, weird, confusing. Now in theaters.
you can see the you can see the signs of Undertale coming
Yes.
out of
We'll get
Off.
into that.
Yes. So yeah, I would say it's a niche game. I wouldn't recommend this to just everybody.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit farther than you. I'm going to go as far as to call this game inspirational, but with about 700 asterisks attached to that. If you've played the Undertales of the world, if you're very familiar with old school JRPGs, if you're very familiar with fan-made RPG Maker games, Off might not have a ton new to you in that you'll recognize a lot of the influences that Off has had in other games in Off. And it's I'm gonna call it the Dune phenomenon, where I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. I used to love me some Star Wars before Disney, of course. And going back to read Dune, it's like it gives my brain a seizure where I keep picking out all of the references, where I have to imagine it's like a big Star Trek nerd watching the Orville, where you just recognize this, and this has been used 100 times over there, and you recognize that, which is like this from over there, and it just causes my brain to go and melt down. So I can't read Dune as much as I want to read Dune, and as much as I appreciate what Dune has done for the sci-fi genre. I just can't do it. Maybe someday I'll be able to get over that barrier, but I've tried it like 4 times and failed every time. So if you're very familiar with those kinds of Undertale types of weird, off-kilter, confusing video games, play Off. You'll have a good time, but it's not going to be life-changing. If you haven't played any of those kinds of games, I would say play Off before you go worry about any of the other ones. I think Off is like the best distilled version of this kind of game in the neatest little package that it has to offer.
It reminds me a little bit of watching The Godfather, not in terms of quality necessarily, but you mentioned you can't help but sit there and see traces of all these things that came after it inside
Yeah.
of it. I watched The Godfather for the first time when I was a freshman in college, which was a very long time ago at this point, but I felt like I'd seen the movie before. Every single scene was something that I saw on The Simpsons or in like a Scorsese film, or it was just all over the place. I knew exactly what was coming at every moment, even having never seen the movie before. And I got a little bit of that in while playing Off.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are my asterisks. If you've played all of those games, you'll definitely find a lot of resemblance in Off. Due to no fault of Off, I'm pretty sure Off came before most, if not all, of those other games that I'm thinking of that I was reminded of when I'm playing Off. But it is what it is.
I really wish that Mortis Ghost talked more about his inspirations, because now when a weird indie game comes out, you can point to it and be like, it was preceded by Undertale or Lisa or whatever. And even like Undertale and Lisa are both really inspired by Mother from back in the day.
I assume
Mortis
Off
Ghost
was as well.
No, he said that I don't think he'd ever played it or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, okay, that's a good piece of information to have. But what did you play? Because the game that you made, as influential as it has been, it makes no sense. Everything is crazy. So I would love to. I Googled for 5 or 10 minutes earlier this week looking for any information about Mortis Ghost's inspirations. Yeah. And I didn't find much. So I would be, if you can get him on the podcast next time, that would be fantastic.
Sure. I'll work on that. I do know he has done like FAQs or AMAs in the past for different anniversaries of Off. So I know he's relatively active and open to talking about the game, but I too have not seen any specific reference to what he's drawing on here.
He mentioned Silent Hill a lot, but
interesting.
I don't see a lot of it. I mean, obviously there is evidence there of that, but
sure.
I don't know, man. When we get talking about the story, it's not real Silent Hilly.
All right. Well, before we get into talking about the plot, I do want to just take a minute to talk about any other remaining context. I know we've talked about a few things here and there, but as far as like life-changing, awesome RPG Maker games go, it's hard to talk about that without mentioning a game like Lisa, which one of the biggest hurdles for any RPG Maker game is not feeling like an RPG Maker game. And if you're not familiar with Lisa, definitely go look it up, check it out. I think it's a longer experience than Off, but wonderful, wonderful, spectacular game. And I would say Lisa does an excellent job of transcending beyond an RPG Maker game. Do you feel like Off crosses that threshold?
No. And that's with the foresight of having played Lisa the Painful, having played Fear and Hunger.
Yeah.
I think games like that completely transcended the engine that bore them. But I also, it's not fair, because I also think that they stood on the shoulders of the people who came before them. It's like, does George R.R. Martin write better fantasy than J.R.R. Tolkien? I don't know. There are people out there that maybe would argue it, but is it really fair that George Martin got to look at J.R.R. Tolkien's work before starting on his own? He got to see what was possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel that way about Off, where 2007 was a long time ago, man. That's almost 20 years ago.
2008. But yes, your point is taken. And
Thank you.
They're using RPG Maker 2003. I never used RPG Maker 2003. The names start to get weird. I forget which one I used. I think I used like MV something, Vista MV. I don't know. But even by then, they started to have like extra plugins that you can add to your game to make it not feel like an RPG Maker game. So like the ATB system is not stock RPG Maker. I assume that was a plugin that he found and stuck it in there to make the gameplay more fun and different than every other RPG Maker game that you've played. So yes, any RPG Maker games that you played that came out a decade after this game have the advantage of having a wealth of extra stuff that people have made available to help customize your game and help it transcend beyond the engine that this game did not have access to. So your point is well taken. All right, we've talked enough about context. Why don't we go ahead and give a recap of the plot? So I'll just kind of walk through it as I remember it in my brain, and you feel free to interject whenever I'm missing something or if there's something that you want to call attention to. But
okay.
So here we go. You play as yourself, who is controlling / in possession of this character called the Batter. And the Batter is on a holy mission from Gad to purify the land, and by extension, so are you. There are 4 zones that comprise this universe, starting with Zone 0, in which you meet the Judge, a talking cat who you occasionally run into and acts as your guide throughout the entire game. You encounter what they call specters, which I don't know that they ever give an explicit definition of what a specter is, but it's effectively a corrupted spirit or person or thing or creature that is causing the land to be corrupt. So you go around killing all of the specters and ignoring the culture of the world, being the stoic protagonist that is the Batter, as you go through each of these different zones. Each of the zones is protected by a guardian, and the guardians have a role of not just serving as the leader of a zone, but also as the anchor of that zone. They are the force by which the zone has come into physical existence from nothingness. As you travel between each of the different zones, you go back into the nothingness, and that's how you get from one area to the next. And so by fighting and vanquishing each of the different guardians, you are effectively erasing that land from existence. We're in spoiler territory now, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, way to go.
Until eventually, after you've fought and beaten each of the different guardians of each of the different zones, you make it to the room, which is where the game goes full metaphor, and you encounter the queen, who is kind of an allegory for a mother-like figure, and there's a child there who kind of serves as an anchor for all of existence in this universe, maybe, ? There's a lot open to interpretation, and it doesn't give you a ton of concrete answers as to what's going on by the time you get to the room. And eventually, once you've purified all of the lands, you have to make a choice of, do you finish the job, or do you turn on the Batter and side with the Judge and save what little is left of this otherwise cleansed environment.
I will say the official ending, according to the game, is the batter finishing the job. It literally says it when you're given the choice.
That's a good point.
Yeah, underneath the batter's ending, it says this is the official ending.
And then the cat is the special ending, which, I mean, is a rude way to make that choice, because as soon as you tell me there's a special ending, I gotta pick the special ending. So I did the cat ending first.
I did the batter first and the judge second.
So, okay. Did I miss any key details of the plot? We can go back and talk about each of the individual zones in a minute, but is that basically what happens?
Yeah, that's all I was going to say, is we glossed over the Guardians and stuff like that.
Yeah, we'll come back to them because there's a lot of cool stuff to talk about. But the core question that I absolutely want to ask you is, how much of this experience to you is literally happening and how much of this experience is metaphor?
I think 99.9% of this is metaphor.
Okay. Because
do you want my thesis? I have it
sure.
written in front of me.
Let's hear it.
All right, here we go. So the child you mentioned, his name is Hugo. He, as you mentioned, seems to be the creative force behind this universe. Without playing the game, it's hard to give all the proper context, but Hugo is... There's
we can
two
assume
things.
At this point in the discussion that either you've played the game or you're not going to play the game. So
Absolutely. But if it came out in 2008, so I'll do my best to contextualize where possible here.
Sure.
Hugo, there's two things that we know about him for a fact. He is a neglected child, and he is not feeling very well. I don't think either of those things are up for debate, right?
When you say he's not feeling very well, do you mean like he's physically sick or just emotionally?
Physically sick.
I'm curious where you got that from.
Doesn't it mention something about his medicine at some point? I can't remember now.
Kind of, yeah. It says something about taking pills, but it doesn't specify what the pills are for. So I don't know if that means that he's actually sick, or the father figure of this universe is, I don't know if he's painted more as an abusive figure or more of just a neglectful guy. But to me, it was unclear if it was a genuine medicine or if it was just like an antidepressant that the dad was giving his kid to try and get him to shut up or something.
I remember he coughs every time he talks.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he's not on screen very much, so I'm struggling to remember too. But so he's neglected and he's not physically well. And he's also in his room throughout the entire game, and we find out as we get closer to the room and eventually into the room that he spends a lot of time in there. He's waiting on his dad. And
in one of the versions of that room, it's actually shown as a jail cell.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And so he spends his time there reading comic books, and one of the comic books has the character of the Batter in it.
Well, hold on. It has the character of the Ball Man. Thank you very much.
Thank you for correcting me. I think it's pretty... It's not a huge stretch to say that Hugo spends his time daydreaming in that room. And I think that his daydream is the world that we play through, zones 0 through 3. All these characters and everything. And the world is really gross. The 5 elements are smoke, meat, plastic,
metal and sugar.
Thank you. Metal and sugar. Not great. And I feel like that is a representation of how Hugo feels. He's not doing well physically. And
I don't know how much of that is how he feels versus his... I mean, he's a little baby. He's a little child. That might be like his limited understanding of the world. Like his neglectful father smoking a cigarette, and the kid asks, "Why are you doing that?" And the dad answers, because this is what I breathe. And now that's how he literally interprets the world around him.
Look, it's my thesis.
All right, sorry. My bad.
It's just, to me, the world is not good. Things are not real healthy. And these specters invade, which is kind of the inciting incident of the entire game. These things called specters, these enemies, they start to inhabit each of the zones. And I kind of took this as Hugo, his illness getting stronger and kind of perpetuating itself in this gross, sick world that was a metaphor for his physical body. And at the beginning of the game, the batter is born from the nothingness. In fact, you return repeatedly to the nothingness throughout the game to fast travel. The batter's born from the nothingness. It's a character that Hugo has seen before. And my interpretation is that the batter is there not to just eradicate the specters, but to just end everything, to turn it all off. The batter keeps talking about purification. And everyone in the world that he encounters is like, oh, purification must mean he's getting rid of the specters. And meanwhile, the batter's just genociding everybody. Spoilers for Undertale inspiration. But
there's a lot of Undertale in here.
Oh, totally. But why is the batter so insistent on his mission? If there's one word to describe him, I think it's zealous. He is uncompromising on his mission. But it's interesting because the individuals in the world, the Elsen, the workers that populate each of the zones, they're also zealous, just in a different direction. They want to do their work, and they want to do it well and neatly and effectively.
Yeah.
Because all these characters were deployed by Hugo to exist in this space. And I think one big sign that this interpretation might be close to what Mortis Ghost was intending was, at the end, it's terrible. You have to actually beat the hell out of Hugo until he's dead. Hugo does not fight back, and he doesn't actually protest either. And I feel like this is what he wants. I feel like he manifested the batter to just turn all his systems off and shut him down and put him out of his misery. And that's exactly what the batter's doing. And that's my pitch. Go ahead and pick it apart.
I really like the way that your thesis wraps up the story of Off and gives so much meaning to the title of Off, because that's wonderful and magical. But I do want to throw potentially one little wrench in your interpretation, which is to say, where you talk about the specters as if it's an outside force attacking him, like a disease or something, when in reality, everything in this world is a specter. All of the Elsen, the low-level workers, are specters as soon as you decide to fight them. Even the batter himself, in every instance, is referred to as an ectoplasmic entity.
That is true, and there are gaps in this. I have a few things written down that don't contradict my theory, but don't fit quite in it.
Yeah.
And I'd actually forgotten about that. Everyone's very confused by the batter. They all mistake him for a specter when they first meet him.
I don't know if that's because he himself is somehow uniquely different from the other creatures of this world in a way that makes him look like a specter, or if it's just the fact that he's not an Elsen means that he must be a specter.
Right. Yeah, I have no idea. So what is your what bow can you put on the narrative to tie it all together?
I think you're right, and that to me seems kind of the whole point of the room. And at some point, I forget where, they're talking about a character looking out a window, and to me, that's what each of the guardians of the zone is that it's Hugo looking out his bedroom window and seeing a tall guy, a bird, and a fat guy. And because his world is so limited, such mundane experiences become the fundamental foundation of his entire existence, of the entire universe of Off. And those are the versions of those characters that you meet when you go to the room. When you encounter each of the Guardians in their own respective zones, they're enemies. But then after you've beaten them all, you encounter them again in this dark hellscape called the Room. And at that point, I don't know that they're friendly, but they're certainly not hostile. They're not the Spectre version of themselves that you fought previously.
In fact, you have to do something for each of them.
Yeah, you gotta help them out. Except for, well, yeah, I guess you give the bird a calendar or something. I don't know, but yes,
you give the calendar to Dan, and then the
give
bird
the calendar to Dan.
Bird gets a book, I think.
Bird gets a book. Fat guy gets out of a hole.
That's right.
But here's another question. Then the batter says that the place where you encounter the Queen was the cradle of his father. So the batter is talking as if he is now Hugo, ? Do you consider the batter to be a direct extension of Hugo, or do you consider him to be a completely separate character now?
I was confused by that whole thing. So I did some Googling on that with the dialogue box open on my screen, actually. And apparently there were some translation issues for that particular scene. And gotcha. There's one line specifically. The Queen says, this child that you and I brought into the world. And I was like, wait, what? And I Googled like batter Hugo's father. Mm-hmm. And that's not the line as it was translated, or as it was supposed to be translated. It was the opposite of that. The child that brought us into the world.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a pretty big difference right there.
It changes everything. What a mistake.
I know, and this is like the third translation too. You'd think you'd catch that most important line in the entire game moment.
But I do appreciate your interpretation, especially with the comment you made earlier about the smoke and the meat and the metal and all that being stuff that Hugo is actively experiencing. Yeah.
For me, that kind of helps accentuate the world as a metaphor, because in my mind, the literal interpretation of the world is far more interesting than this is all taking place in the mind of a child, because we've seen that done a million, billion, zillion times in every other RPG Maker game ever made and every Five Nights at Freddy's game ever made. It's a little bit overdone, and I totally get it. It wasn't overdone in 2008, but this is my Dune syndrome coming back into play.
Sure.
Where, to me, like, when you're going through... So, all right, let's talk a little bit about each of the different zones to help maybe fill in any of these gaps. Zone 0 is a nothing zone. It technically doesn't have a... All right, I'm going to have to stop myself here. Before I even get into the zones, let me ask you, how much of this game did you actually play? Did you go back into any of the zones after you'd cleared them?
Yes.
Okay, so once you've beaten the Guardian of a zone, the whole zone becomes a white, empty nothingness, and all of the enemies in the zones are replaced by what's called secretaries, and they look like little babies, occasionally with luchador masks and very predominant nipples.
This was the difficulty spike I mentioned earlier.
Yes, this was a big part of those difficulties spikes that I encountered, where that's where I started to run into trouble, especially when you go back into Zone 3, and the way the zone is laid out is a little bit confusing, where if you go, there's a building, you go into the building, and there's a very short dead end to the right, and there's the rest of the level to the left. And if you go to the rest of the level to the left, you find groups of 3 enemies. But if you go into that tiny little dead end, you can find individual enemies off on their own. And I didn't know that. So I got stuck at a point where I was slightly behind the curve, fighting groups of 3 enemies at a time that were way too strong for me. So that took me a little bit of time. But the naming of the secretaries is interesting to me, because I guess they're the spirits overseeing the dissolution of this environment, and by virtue of it being a baby or young child, toddler, I don't know, they don't give ages to any of these creatures, makes it seem to me like it's some clone or more direct representation of Hugo, other than that it's a mindless force rather than, you don't, the secretaries are one of the enemies in the game that you can't talk to them despite having a humanoid shape.
Yes. I think a lot of the narrative in Off can be explained by whatever drugs Mortis Ghost was taking while he was developing it. I don't have an explanation for the secretaries. They don't make any sense to me whatsoever. And I was very confused by all of that. I think it would have been more thematically powerful if the zones were just empty with no random encounters. But
and there is one case where you run into an Elson in a purified zone. I think in zone 2, when you go back into the residential area.
He was in the vault, I think.
Yeah, he's hanging out.
And he was thrilled. He was like, everyone's dead and everything's gone, and this is great.
Okay, so then next question: did you get the super secret true ending?
I did, but I only because I Googled it after I did the batter's ending and the judge's ending. I was
cheater.
Is there any more to this?
Did you find sucre, aka sugar?
Yes.
Okay, because there is a total super secret boss in the basement of Zone 0 after you've cleared out one of the purified versions of the subsequent zones.
Which is really disturbing that the judge just has a woman in his basement.
Now that you put it that way, I did not consider that, because at the very end of the game, the judge tries to guilt trip you and say, like, I can't believe I was deceived by you and how evil you are for going through and killing everyone, when in reality he also had a girl locked in his basement with this world's version of drugs. Sugar in this world is the closest thing this world gets to drugs, because all of the Elson, all of the workforce of Zone 3 are helplessly addicted to it.
I mean, it sounds normal.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. We're Americans here.
Now, to be fair to the judge, the girl doesn't seem too distressed to be trapped down there.
I mean, she was high out of her mind on those sugar crystals, man.
Yeah, that's true. I did auto battle her as well, and I won.
She was one of the tougher ones. By the time I got back, because I think I found her after Zone 2. So, if I had gone back there after Zone 3, then it probably would have been a walk in the park. But yeah, you have to beat all of those. You have Guardians, and then you have to beat Sugar, aka Sucre, to get her special super secret item. And then the last super secret item you buy from a vendor, which, again, I had to go back and grind for that because I didn't have the money, because I'd been buying upgrades for my guys whenever I had the chance.
Likewise.
But, whatever. I totally appreciate that the super secret ending is just the developer having fun with it. It doesn't have any super secret meaning. Spoilers. They're apes that come from space, and I'm gonna just assume they're called the Ratatams because that's the first thing they say. And they want to appropriate the newly cleansed world of Off to take advantage of their factories to be able to fight the floating brain aliens from the planet Orus. Complete non sequitur, But who cares at that point? You've beaten it all. You've seen everything. I had myself a little giggle.
It made as much sense as the rest of the game.
I appreciated it as something that you would only get in a game made by a person, and you will never get an ending like that in a game made by Activision or Microsoft, or I guess they're the same company now.
Yeah, I don't know. They had the cow level back in the day.
Back in the day, though, that Blizzard is long buried. Rest in peace.
Yeah, that's true.
Now the new Blizzard subsists on making references to the fact that they were creative enough to have a cow level at one point in their history.
And really, that was another small team, Blizzard North, back in the day. Yeah. Condor. That was just a handful of people. I know, man. Small teams. It doesn't get any smaller than one guy. Although I think Mortis Ghost had some help with I can't remember now whether it was music or
it was a different guy who did the music. So interestingly, like in the README, it says like if you want to use any of these assets, I don't know why you would, because I guess he thinks they're ugly, but go ahead. But the music is not mine. So if you want the music, you have to go talk to somebody. Alpha Conrad something.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's easy enough to find out. I assume he's still active as well. I don't know what other projects he's worked on. Elias Conrad Coldwood.
I think that's Alias.
Alias Conrad Coldwood. Well, you're probably right.
I don't know. He did a good job, though. Disgusting soundtrack.
What else we got here?
The biggest mystery to me was the religious motifs.
Okay.
I was not able to find anything online about Mortis Ghost's intentions for having such overt religious overtones.
You're definitely going to be way more in tune with those than I am. So let's give me what you got, and I'll see if I picked up on any of this.
There are so many. Hang on, let me grab my notes.
Okay.
I stopped keeping track after a while too. Your party members are Alpha, Omega, and Epsilon.
Yeah.
Also known as the Father, the Son, and the Ghost.
But what about the add-ons that the Queen has, Vader Aloha, which I have to assume Aloha is mother in some other language, because as we all know, Vader is father in German or whatever. But yeah, her add-ons are Delta, Sigma, and Ipsilon. Is that anything? Does that scratch any of your religious overtone?
Not those specifically,
okay.
But they're part of the same alphabet as
sure
Alpha and Omega. The in-game items that you can use in combat, you have like Abaddon's meat and Moloch's meat.
Yeah,
these are like pagan deities.
Okay.
There was a poster in the game that made reference to the fourth Sunday of Lent.
Yes, I did catch that, which I did like those posters. I liked the little bit of graphic work that went into them.
And then, of course, you have the judge as the cat, but more specifically, you have Enoch, one of the bosses.
Which one is Enoch?
Big boy, fat
That's
guy.
The big boy. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm pretty familiar with the Book of Enoch in the Bible. Well, it's an apocryphal text, but the big boy Enoch, to my knowledge, has nothing to do with the biblical Enoch. Like there's nothing even close that I can figure out.
I guess I will throw off under the bus a little bit and say that it does seem like a lot of the naming conventions were just Mortis Ghost saying, "What do you do?" You've got special equipment items that have super awesome bonus effects. What do you name those? I don't know. There's like 7 of them, I guess. So days of the week. I don't know that the days of the week had any special significance. I would love to see like a more in-depth telling of the game of Off, where like, I don't know, there's one called Wednesday, and maybe the Wednesday item makes it so that you have reduced mana cost of your abilities, and so maybe there's something that happened on Wednesday in Hugo's life that corresponds to that effect. I don't know, but we don't get anything like that in the game that I'm aware of. You just get an item and it's called Wednesday and it has an effect, and throughout the game there's like playing cards all over everything, and when you get to the end of one of the purified zones, one of the ways you know that you've gotten there is that the back wall has the texture of a 10 of spades. I didn't get anything from that. I mean, specific, like, why the 10 of spades? Why playing cards at all? I don't know. But playing cards were a thing. Days of the week were a thing. Obviously, the religious figure names were a thing. A lot of the add-on abilities were art-related things. So, like, one of the add-ons was all about, like, different perspectives. And one of the abilities is, like, overused perspective. And it makes it makes for a very awesome language. It makes for a very awesome dictionary of the game that I really enjoyed, but I couldn't necessarily derive meaning from it other than the fact that it's very unusual language, and by virtue of it being unusual, it helps draw your attention to these things in a way that if your special ability was just called like Turbo Booster, my brain would glaze over and I'd completely ignore it and just equip it and move on.
I am almost certain that you're correct. The fact I looked so into some of these religious references, and I couldn't find anything. I'm almost positive that Mortis Ghost was just like, I need names, so Bible's a good spot.
And I'm okay with that. It is a little bit, I don't want to say deceitful design, but there's a lot of red herrings, which I guess is okay because it leaves more room for interpretation, but I'm always going to be a proponent to having intention behind the things that you do. And I guess it's fair enough to say that the intention here is just surrealist word association.
And this is probably one of my biggest complaints about the game is either I'm not smart enough, which is a huge possibility. I'm not smart enough to detect the intentionality here, or the word association thing is in full effect. And I'm pretty sure that this game was an exercise in the developer saying, what would be cool here? And it made something fun to play. Like, I enjoyed playing it, but I don't think there's a lot below the surface intentionally here. I really appreciate the community for being able to mine so much intrigue out of this. What to me is looking more and more like a series of interesting ideas just thrown into a pot and shaken up.
And there's room in the world for that. I don't hate that. Like I said, for me, I appreciate that this is the kind of experience that you wouldn't get from any major release, especially not in 2023.
Unless it's from Kojima or somebody.
I mean, you'll get weird there, for sure.
That's another podcast we have to do about how much I hate Kojima.
What's your least favorite Kojima game?
Probably Metal Gear Solid 4.
Is that Sons of Liberty? Is that the one that's like 120 hours of cutscenes?
Metal Gear Solid 4. Yes, I believe that is. It is definitely the one where I was sitting there playing it, and I think there was like I measured 4 minutes of gameplay and like 47 minutes of cutscenes to start the game.
Yeah.
That is Guns of the Patriots.
Oh, okay.
Yep, Solid Snake with the cop mustache. Now it's tricky because Metal Gear Solid 1 is a classic, in my opinion. 3 is a classic. 2 is it's fun to play, and I hated 4, and I really didn't like 5 either. So,
oh really? Everybody loved 5.
We can. This is another. We need to reserve like 5 hours for this, the Kojima conversation, whenever that is, and I can make a bunch of enemies on the internet.
I'll do that whenever we get to a FromSoft discussion.
Yeah, that's the two sides of the same coin. You're critical of FromSoft, and I'm critical of Kojima.
All right. So to keep us on track here, do you have anything that you want to add about Zachary and the fourth wall breaking? There are a couple of characters in this game. The judge is one of them, the cat, and Zachary, the vendor, is another one who recognize at least that you as the player exist, and also frequently reference the fact that you are in a video game.
I have a line in my notes dedicated to Zachary, and I'll keep it PG for the podcast. It is, who the F is Zachary, and why does he have medium awareness? I don't have anything else about him. I didn't get any answers. He owns a theme park, I guess.
He owns a theme park.
That's about the only thing we know about him. That's like beyond what the scope of the story of the game.
He has a relationship with Sugar,
that
the
is
girl
true,
in the
yeah.
basement. I thought they were brother and sister, but I guess I just made that up in my brain, and the only thing that they actually explicitly say is that they knew each other or were friends. And once you kill Sugar and you talk to Zachary, he just says, I guess it's better this way. Which, given everything that we've talked about, now makes it sound to me like Zachary isn't even specifically talking about the fact that Sugar is dead as much as it is that he's talking about the fact that the batter is completing his mission of ending the world. And that's just another stepping stone on that path, and Zachary is saying, yep, all right, we're getting closer to the end. I guess it's better that way.
I don't have any answers about him, and I don't know that there are any. I know that sometimes creators will include these characters in their stories to just, I don't know, add a unique depth or perspective. I know that Brandon Sanderson has a character that appears in a lot of his books that can traverse dimensions and stuff like that. And I get the same feeling of Zachary. He's just there to imbue the experience with just a little bit more intrigue.
Yeah, he definitely is one of the most mysterious characters, especially given the fact that there is also a narrative mechanic of possession in this world. So the judge has a brother named Valerie, which is weirdly similar to Zachary. And Valerie, as a cat, theoretically kills/eats the bird guardian of Zone 2, and by eating the bird then possesses the cat. And at some point after that gives the judge the idea of possessing Valerie. Similar names, of possessing Zachary. So at some point Zachary eats the judge and then must have spit him back out. I guess that didn't really go anywhere, did it?
I am confused by that whole thing. There's that one zone where Zachary's appearance changes. And,
yeah. Well, because he starts talking like the judge, and he starts saying, instead of saying like, he says meow.
That's right. Yeah, he's doing a bad impression of a cat.
Is he doing an impression of a cat? I thought that was literally, the judge learned through what happened with his brother that possession is a thing in this universe. So why not possess the guy who can see through the fourth wall? And maybe that was the whole advent of the judge realizing that what we were doing was evil.
I don't know about that, because you can go back to the top of the library where you fought the bird, and the judge is still up there.
Oh, even after?
If memory serves, I think. It could be that Zachary's wearing the dead cat, which would shock me.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of weirdness with the whole possession thing that didn't go anywhere, but I guess it didn't really need to go anywhere. But that's why I say the literal interpretation of this world is so much more interesting to me than the metaphorical interpretation of the game, because interpreting possession as a metaphor of these imaginary friends of Hugo is kind of like, all right, whatever, I don't even know. But the literal idea of a world made of these 5 elements and that people can possess each other by eating them that's kind of cool. And that also kind of plays into everyone in Zone 3 going completely crazy because all they do is snort sugar all day long, which, as you discover, is the crystallized vapors of burned corpses, which, again, is really cool world building. I love the world building of Off. I'd have to say that's like my number one highlight of the game.
Then I have a world building question for you.
Okay.
What do you think about the pedalos?
Well, again, so the metaphorical interpretation of that is at some point the dad, or was it the mom? I think it was the dad, invited Hugo to go on a pedalo ride. Maybe once he gets better, and some future that's never going to come to be. And so that gets Hugo excited about pedalos, and so now that becomes the primary mode of transportation in his imaginary fantasy land.
I'm shocked that you were so ready to answer that question.
I got my note sheet here too. I was
no kidding. I don't have any notes on the pedalos. Well done.
They did call that out at one point in one of the little hidden dialogue bits, which, you know, again, as an element of world building is really cool because it's not what you would expect. You would not expect this world to be Ghibli-style monorails and pedalos. One of the interesting things is they do talk about how the zones are connected to each other, and that it seems like, with the exception of sugar that comes from Zone 3, all of the other 4 elements of smoke, metal, plastic, and meat come from Zone 1 and get transported to the other zones. But at no point do they talk about interzone transport or whatever, literally.
And it's interesting as well, each zone says that they're the first and most important element.
Yeah, I like that. Everyone thinks they are the most important thing.
I couldn't connect that to the broader plot, but I thought I thought I had misread it. I'm like, didn't they say smoke was the first element? Mm-hmm. Now they're saying meat is, now they're saying metal is.
Those are my favorite lines of dialogue in the entire game, is why each of the Elsen thinks that their element is the most important one. Like, I wrote down the sugar one, which is because without sugar, people could no longer bear reality and they would go mad. Which is that's just a lovely little line. That's also very
the
true.
the most honest one of them all.
Yeah, it's good. It gives so much more, I don't know, depth to otherwise very flat characters, because it gives you perspective into why each of these little Elsen worker people thinks that what they're doing is so important, because there's some simple fundamental value that they can fall back on to explain what they're doing.
I mentioned the word zealousness before. The only characters in the game that don't demonstrate a fervent sense of responsibility are the judge and Zachary, and that's it. And even the judge, even though he's kind of chill about a lot of stuff, even at the end, I mean, he jumps in the way of the batter and is like, okay, I'm putting an end to this right now. Zachary's the only laissez-faire character in the entire thing.
While we're there, I do want to call attention to the art of the batter when you fight him as the judge. It's easily the coolest piece of art in the entire game.
I do agree.
It also introduces a really interesting idea of how relevant perspective is in this world. Because on the one hand, you could interpret it as once a character has been identified as a specter and is engaged in combat, then their physical appearance morphs into a horrible monster. Or you could interpret it as this is how everybody else sees each other all the time. And the batter sees the Elson as these horrible monstrosities with ink or blood or whatever spewing out of their neck holes. And everybody else sees the batter as this horrible monstrosity, and that's why they can mistake him for a specter all the time.
I did get the sense that the batter looks like that all the time. And I'm trying to think of the evidence. I should have written this down. I had the distinct impression when that big reveal was made, when you select the judge's ending, and the batter becomes the game's last boss, and he's this abomination. I remember thinking like, okay, that's what he looks like.
Yeah.
But I know this is really compelling podcasting when I say that I can't remember why I feel that way.
I think that's a big part of it. It's just that everybody talks to him like he's a specter at first, and everybody is hesitant when they meet him, like he's not just a dude.
Yes, that wasn't why, but yes, that makes sense too.
But again, that was another part of me thinking like this game would make for such a cool 3D experience, where I'm just imagining what it would look like if you choose to engage an Elson and just like their head explodes and ink or blood or whatever comes spewing out of their neck hole and arm hole and is now this horrible monstrosity that you have to fight that was just a normal dude 2 seconds ago. Like, I'd love to see those animations in motion and play out in a combat scenario.
Like I said, man, get Mortis Ghost on the phone. We can make this happen.
Puzzles. Yeah, I agree with you that the puzzles relied a little bit too much on just making sure the numbers all line up with each other. There is, again, it is a memory thing at the end. How many of those 4 questions did you get right? Once you make it to the end, and they do a cool thing where you have to like visit the room, but using different save files, and based on the save file you choose, you get a different version of the room. So you need to get like information from each of the different versions of the room to be able to fully explore everything. And in one of those iterations, there's a little sequence of trivia questions. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I'm trying to remember what the trivia questions are.
One of them was what day it is.
Yes, and then you get that from a poster.
Yeah. But you can't go back.
I got that one incorrect. I selected Monday, and I don't remember why. I saw something that said Monday. I did get the subsequent questions correct, however.
Dang. I got the first one right and the last one right. I didn't get the 2 in the middle right. I think they were asking about names of the different characters and like which train station were the cowsheds at. And it's like, shoot, I wrote down the names of all the stations. I know Elson was the first one, and I know Almond was the last one. But was it Damien? Was it Pintel?
I believe it started with the D, the cowshed one. I could be wrong about that though. But yeah, I got missed the day of the week, got the rest of them correct.
That was one of the interesting things to me, is in that first zone is one of the Elson says that all of the names of the different stations were named after important people, which seems like a pretty big lore red flag there. Which my loose interpretation is that Elson is some version of an interpretation of Hugo's father as being just like a busybody workaholic. Maybe. I don't know about the other ones. Like Shachihara, like that's such a weird name that you can't tell me that there's an important person named Shachihara and then not talk about Shachihara at any point throughout the rest of the game.
Yes. And I think also some of those stations were named semi-biblically. I can't remember exactly. I was doing a lot of Googling of Bible verses throughout this because I was positive that there was a significant religious tie-in to this, and didn't find any evidence of that. But some of the stations were very close to names of places in the Bible. Again, I'm wondering if your theory is correct, and Mortis Ghost is like, oh shoot, I need location names. Let's go dig some up.
In most cases, I would say that's probably what happened here, but there's a specific line from an Elson where he says, these are names of important people. And then it didn't pay off, and I was sad.
That is disappointing. I don't remember that line.
It's somewhere in that first zone, or, well, technically the second zone. If you are in a country where you call the first floor the 0th floor, like, what are you doing? Can you fix that, please? The first floor is the first floor. If you say the second floor is the first floor, I can't relate to you anymore. I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't think we have a leg to stand on as people that use the imperial system.
Zone 2 is Bismarck. I don't think that came up anywhere. We have. That's one of the things I did appreciate is each of the zones has its own real personality. The first Zone 1 is very industrial. It's where all of the elements come from. Zone 2 is the metropolis of this world. It has a gigantic library. It's got a theme park. It's got the residential area. Zone 3 is... That's kind of like, I don't know, the back alleys of this world. That's where the secrets are. And then the room, where the metaphor comes all crashing down. Maybe I missed this. I have notes here where you're mapping controller buttons to letters, and one of the buttons is Z for Zachary, one of the buttons is B for the batter, one of the buttons is J for the judge, and one of the buttons is D for director. Who was the director? Was that just referencing Enoch?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. That's why I couldn't remember the Enoch name, because they called him by different things, and I think I just called him the Big Fatso when I was playing, because
the executive was another one.
Oh, okay. Because then there was also the boss, who was also just Zachary, who owned the theme park in Zone 2.
Yes. But that was, Zone 3. Yeah, Zone 3, it was Batter, Zachary, Director, and what was the other one?
The Judge.
Judge, yeah, that's right. Yep, you had to give over the music box.
You had to give over the music box, which was, again, another item called out in Hugo's backstory, that was something somebody gave him.
Yes, apparently if you just cheat and go straight to the README, you can hold on to the music box and give it to Hugo later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this was when I was Googling if I missed anything, and I wasn't about to go back and get the music box, so I YouTubed it, and it gives you an add-on weapon, I believe.
Oh. Okay.
But I mean, but by that point in the game, there's only like one fight left. I hate when games do that.
Yeah. Well, I was really scared when you had the choice of, once you've collected all of the 5 grand finale items, and you can turn those in to Zachary for one of two things. You either get the Ares card, which again, the tarot cards were another one of those things, I think, where he was just, or I guess they're not tarot cards, they're, what's the word? Astrological signs, zodiac signs. There you go. Cards are how you gain access to the different zones, and the super secret card is the Ares card that gets you access to the super secret ending of the Space Monkeys. But you have a choice. Do you want the super secret card to get to the super secret ending, or do you want the best item in the game? And at that point, I didn't know how many more boss fights there were going to be, but like, you definitely didn't need that bat to beat the game. The last two boss fights were like the easiest two in the whole game.
And all I have to do is auto.
Yeah. Did you like the auto feature? I like the auto feature.
Yes. Yeah, I thought it was good because well, it's just a time saver. We haven't talked about like some of the mazes and stuff like that in the game. But random encounters can get so grating on you when you're navigating a maze and you're hitting all these dead ends and all that. So having the auto feature was kind of nice.
I do feel like they did a relatively good job of making, I don't know what to call it. I'll call it time-wasting navigation. A lot of time-wasting navigation in these random encounter-based RPGs is just making the hallway longer so that you have to do another fight to get to the end, on average.
Sure.
This game, rather than making the world exceptionally long, they made it gated based on puzzle information. So it's not that you have to go a long distance, it's just that you need to make sure that you read all the right books. So it's up to you whether or not you took the right notes the first time through, or if you have to go back and get it. So like, there were times like with the books in the library where I had to go back and reread the books because I didn't write the correct notes. And I didn't blame the game for that. I was like, oh, dang, I made a mistake. So now I have to go back and do more encounters. And I was okay with it.
It is certainly a step above what so many games do nowadays, where this is not exactly apples to apples, but if you select hard mode, all the enemies just have increased HP and they just do increased damage.
Yeah.
That is so freaking lazy. I hate it so much. So I do agree that I appreciate Mortis Ghost's his technique for kind of adding depth to that experience instead of breadth.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think that covers everything that I've got here in my notes. In terms of highlights, are there any specific moments in the game that stood out to you as like, this is the coolest part of this game, or alternatively, this is the most stupidest part of this game?
Yes. I don't know if I have the stupid half of that, but I loved seeing the batter's true form when you assume the role of the judge at the very end.
I think that's probably the best moment of the game. That's like the best one, like, whoa.
When you're fighting the queen and her attacks are just like, they're not insults. They are very insulting to hear, but it's almost like when someone you care about delivers a very hard truth about you to your face.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
She's like the most important character to this entire world, and we really haven't talked about the queen much at all. She has the weirdest dialogue in the game. It completely breaks the format when the batter meets the queen, and all of a sudden it reads like a book, and they say, the batter said blank. And then the queen replied blank. And again, I don't know how much of this is translation error, but then they start talking about a birthday party, and you baked the cake, but you forgot who the cake was for. And I don't know if that's supposed to be a metaphor inside of a metaphor inside of a metaphor, or if they're literally talking about Hugo's birthday party and Hugo is harboring resentment for his mother because he sees his mother as the good one of his two parents, but then is also secretly being neglected by her too.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with the Queen, and especially I can't remember exactly the script that addressed this, but only the Queen has the ability to do something. I think Dedan says it near the beginning. The batter's like, "I've come to do this," and someone's like, "Only the Queen can do that."
Well, what Dedan says is that he's come to kill specters, and I think Dedan says something along the lines of like, only the Guardians or the Queen could do that. But I don't know if that's exactly what you're referencing or not.
Probably. But the Queen is an interesting character considering how little screen time she gets.
Yeah, because they say that I thought that they say throughout the game that she's the one that's created the world, which, I mean, based on all of the other metaphorical content of the game, is very clearly pointing to Hugo. But otherwise, did maybe the Queen, maybe the mother told Hugo a bedtime story and said something like, "Hey, look, you can believe anything you want in the world of your imagination," or something. I don't know.
The correct translation was pretty straightforward when it said that the child that brought us into this world.
Yeah, but I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure throughout the game they say that the Queen is the one who created the zones. Maybe not the originator of the entire world and of the Queen, but they say that, which maybe just means that that's what they're led to believe and is not the actual truth. And the actual truth is that Hugo did it all. But at the same time, the Guardians still have the purview over their each respective zones. So Hugo did not necessarily create zones 1 through 3 because you kill the Guardian and that zone goes away. Hugo creates the Guardians and the Guardians create the zones, but then Hugo creates the Queen and the Queen creates the Guardians? I don't know.
I think this is a reason why people are still talking about Off so many years after it was developed, because it's like working a Rubik's Cube that when you think you have it solved, there's still one color that's out of line. And you're like, "Oh, okay, that's not quite it. Let me try again."
Yeah.
Nothing seems to fit together that cleanly. And I think that's probably the secret to its impact and its longevity in people's minds. I mean, the Off subreddit is still reasonably active for a small subreddit. And I mean, this is something that's been available for at least English-speaking people for 12 years now.
That is absolutely the secret of FNAF's longevity, is giving you all of these little bits of lore pieces, and you can fit 9 out of 10 of them together in 10 different ways, but you can't fit 10 out of 10 of them together in any way.
Yeah, that maybe that's the secret to just enchanting MatPat, and then his advertisement is the secret to being a runaway success.
So that he can eventually make his money back by being a cameo in your future movie.
Hey man, I'm not throwing stones. I do the same thing.
Yeah, my seeing the batter was obviously super cool. But otherwise, yeah, my favorite part is just getting that world building of discovering each of the different elements and getting to see those cool old school Sears catalog descriptions, which I guess those were created for this. I mean, they look like genuine, like, cutouts from other things. Like, it doesn't look like it was created art for this game. But from what little bits of French I got, like there's a picture of a cow, and the text above the cow is talking about metal, which, like, this whole world, you know, gets their metal by cutting cows in half. I don't know why there would be an actual French diagram of a cow talking about metal.
It reminds me of, I want to say the Victorian era. I think it's probably earlier than that. There were these diagrams, and again, they were almost like alchemical.
Yeah.
Where they nobody knew about bacteria or anything like that. So they thought there was a recipe to make maggots, and that recipe was to leave like poultry or beef in the sun and in some grass for X amount of time, and to sprinkle water on it every now and then. And so if you needed maggots for something, there was a recipe to create maggots. And
it's not wrong, sort of.
That's true. And they actually had these pamphlets, these instructional pamphlets for how to do it. I remember seeing them in a very old textbook back when I was in school.
Can I just stop you there for 1 second? Who needs maggots? Who's like, you know what today is missing? Maggots.
Maggots
it's a very specific example that you've given me.
Well, it's because I know how to make maggots.
Wow.
I think there was one I remember for like bees, and there were a few in there. But yeah, maggots, man, they clean out wounds and they do all sorts of stuff. That's actually the only thing I know about them that's useful. But
clean out wounds. I don't think I'm ever going to put a maggot anywhere near any of my open wounds, no matter how much you try to convince me otherwise.
Now you're going to tell me you're against like bloodletting and leeches? But
that bad blood.
Those pamphlets in Off reminded me a lot of those pamphlets about how to create maggots. Yeah. Like this off base thing. Okay, cut the cow in half and then you can extract the metal, and you're like, wait. I think you have a bigger problem here.
Did you interpret that literally? As in there are literally giant balls of metal inside of cows?
Not initially, until you take a pedalo through a river of meat water.
Meat juice.
Yep. And then I was like, okay, this world has fallen.
Which again, totally works in my mind as like a thing somebody told a child once, and is like one of those things that you believe for way too long, and you're ashamed to admit that like you believed as a 16-year-old that metal came from the inside of cows because your uncle told you that once when you were like 4 at a birthday party, and you just never had a reason to disbelieve it. Oh,
I got all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct.
To me, that's what that is somebody told you that that's where metal comes from.
You know, in Sri Lanka, there's rivers of meat. Like, I could totally see, like, my father having told me that when I was a kid.
Which is kind of the magical thing to me about a game, or like the world building of Off, is you take those kinds of impressions literally and you build a world around it, and that's just cool because it's so unique and different from everything else you played, except for any of the other games that have characters that break the fourth wall and Undertale all over the place. I don't know. Is there anything you want to talk about the Undertale influences here? Because there's, Dadan's physical art being the inspiration for Papyrus. There's like specific encounters that drew from Undertale. I mean, I would recommend somebody play Off before I'd recommend somebody play Undertale. Not because I'm hating on Undertale, but just because I think you get so much of what Undertale offers in a much shorter, cleaner package.
I think, and full disclosure for those listening, I am not a big fan of Undertale.
You're not a furry. I'm sorry. I've just spoiled it to the internet. I've ruined your secret. He's not a furry, people.
Not to your knowledge, anyway. Maybe I'm just a furry with very high standards, but I will say
you're not a furry.
I will say that I think Undertale is a better video game in terms of the mechanics, in terms of some of the creative interaction.
It's more polished.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's just cool stuff like the Undertale, the final boss fight where he'll crash your game and delete the app from your device and all that.
You get really, some of that here. So like we made jokes about why did you read the README, because one of the puzzles is that you have to go into the README.
And this is what I was talking about with George R.R. Martin and J.R.R. Tolkien, is I don't know what inspired Mortis Ghost to put a puzzle solution in his README.
But that's a Metal Gear thing, right? You gotta move the controller over to the player 2 port by reading the description on the back of your CD case or whatever.
Maybe? Sure, yeah. That was a Psycho Mantis back in the day.
Mantis.
Yeah, like your memory card slot and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is cool. And I don't specifically know of any game that had you actually go into the game files and search for stuff. I'm sure it's happened before 2008, but I don't know of any examples of this. So I don't know where Mortis Ghost got his inspiration from, and I give because of my ignorance, essentially, I give him a lot more credit for that type of stuff than I do Toby Fox. Is that the dude's name? Undertale?
Yeah.
Credit to Toby Fox for executing on it really, really impressively. But in terms of just sheer creativity, like off the wall engagement with a game, I give a lot more credit to Off. Oh yeah. I did that on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say play Off, and if you like Off, then go play Undertale. So, if you haven't played Undertale and you made it this far through playing Off in this discussion, and you really enjoyed it, then yeah, maybe go play Undertale, because I'm sure it's your cup of tea.
Yep, seconded.
Anything that I really didn't like about the game? Nothing really stands out to me. It's very gentle with the parts of these kinds of games that I normally hate, which is those moments where you get gated from content. So, like that trivia segment at the end where you have to answer the question correctly or else you don't get the item. And it's like, well, shoot, I mean, these items could be super secret, unique items, and this is the only time you can get them, or else you just don't get them. Or when you're going through the residential area and there's a time limit, and there are like 3 or 4 different vaults throughout the zone, and you have to get the codes and go into the vaults before the time limit runs out. And I didn't get to go in one of the vaults, and I was like, oh crap, what if there's the best item in the whole game there? Like, what if there's one of those grand finale items that you need to get the super secret ending in there? Now I'll never know, except you actually get to go back into the vaults in the purified version of the game. So, like, those moments that normally would have stood out to me as being, like, horribly frustrating and awful really didn't bother me at all, because the only ones that were unforgiving were at the end of the game after you already get everything you need for the true ending. And yeah,
the design of it overall, I know it has its foibles, and I've talked about a little bit about some of the things that I wish were done a little bit differently, but the design of the experience overall is very tight. And Mortis Ghost, as much as I said he threw a bunch of concepts into a pot and shook it up, which I do believe is true, the actual manufacturing of a product that we all can interact with was done at an expert level, I think. He really, really knew what he was doing when he assembled all these mechanics together.
Yeah, and given how much time has passed between Off and now, if and when Mortis Ghost ever finishes whatever this video game project is he's working on now, I'm definitely going to be first in line to see what he's come up with. And if you want details, he does have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, and he has like a special PDF that he throws together every month to show you what he's been working on, which is kind of cool. The only caveat is it might all be in French. I don't know. He's French speaking.
His Twitter is a lot of it's in English. So
Twitter's a lot of it in English, and when I read the first couple of issues of his comic Dr. Cataclysm, it was also in English. So it might be in English, but the little bits of his Patreon I saw were in French. Roll the dice, or just break out Google Translate. But all right, that's Off, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anything else that we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to mention?
Where does this rank all time on your personal list of video games that feature a baseball player as a protagonist?
It's baseball protagonist. Right underneath Backyard Baseball for Windows 95. If I had to put it somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable.
Well, I don't know, because Wii Sports Baseball, that was my jam. It's a good baseball game.
MVP Baseball 2005.
Okay.
Backyard Baseball.
Right. Yeah.
That's about all I can think of, though. This is up there.
I can throw a personal connection because I've been spending a lot of time in the batting cages in Japan, so I'm something of the batter myself. You know.
Wow.
If that's not an excellent way to end a discussion on off, I don't know what is.
Well, let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me and talking about off. I hope you enjoyed the game. It sounds like you did. Next month, January, the first year of 2024, Year of the Dragon, I will be joined by another guest to play Xenoclash. Are you familiar with Xenoclash at all?
No.
It is an action/fighting game set in a punk fantasy world. The game is played from a first-person perspective, and the combat is generally up close and brutal. Experience a deep storyline set in a fantastic world. My experience with Xenoclash is that I started to play Xenoclash 2 for, I think, 2 episodes of the early version of my YouTube channel when I set out to be a young Let's Player in the world. It has now been delisted. Those videos have been scrubbed from the internet. Nobody will ever find them. But it was such a weird game with such a weird world. And again, it's a 6-ish hour long game, both Xenoclash and Xenoclash 2. So I thought, what better time than the Imaginary Game Club than to go back and give that franchise a try. I'll send you the link to that if you want to take a look at some of these screenshots.
Reviews are quite good.
The reviews are good. The screenshots are weird. The combat has a weird... I don't know. It's like given how old the game is, this came out the first one came out in 2009. It has like a visceral feeling to it, which is certainly not common for first-person games of the time. Like, I don't know. When did Mirror's Edge come out?
Oh gosh, I can't remember. Mirror's Edge. If I could type. Mirror's Edge came out in 2009.
Well, all right. So they beat Mirror's Edge to the punch, literally, because it's a punching game. There it is. So, yeah, if you want to keep up to date on the latest games that are going to be coming up for the Imaginary Game Club, make sure you hop into the Imaginary Game Studios Discord server. We'll be announcing all the upcoming titles. And for next month, we'll be playing Xenoclash. It's $10 on Steam. A little bit more expensive than free for off, but still, I think, a reasonable price for what looks to be a very interesting and unique experience. So that's going to be it from me. Thanks, everybody, so much for joining us, and thank you, Eric, for playing through off together. Hope you'll get a chance to maybe check out Xenoclash so that you can check out the Imaginary Game Club discussion yourself next month. And
I think I might.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks again, everybody.
I appreciate it, man.
Have a great rest of your evening, and until next time.
Thank you for listening.